Thank you, Sylvie. My name's Janet, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I got sober in Marin, and I now currently reside at the Petaluma Fellowship. I got here tonight because I met Kelly on a rafting trip, and she chose me to speak at another meeting. And I don't remember the gentleman who said, can you speak at big meetings? And next thing I know, I was asked to speak. And I do that in face of being nervous or fearful for my recovery. To add to it, I found out tonight that they record this meeting. And I didn't run. And I think this program is not for sissies. It is really, takes a lot of courage to go through recovery. It's about change, and it's about getting honest with who you are and who you are not, and be willing to take a good, honest look at yourself and your part in your miserable life. I was born in San Francisco in 1953, and both my parents were city people. My dad was a taxi driver, and my mother worked in the bar business way back then. They were good people, but as parents, they lacked a lot of nurturing skills, and I was the third child born. Do I really need to lean over? Okay. I was the third child born, and by that time, I'm sure the dysfunction in my family was running rampant. I learned the rules and how to live life through my older brother, who was 4 years older than me. And that's how I learned. I learned what I was supposed to do, what I wasn't supposed to do, how to tie my shoes. And while that was really nice and they protected me, they weren't, I formed a lot of opinions based on a 4-year-old's guidance. And I grew up with that. When I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was very, very immature and still making bad decisions, and I lived in fear most of the time. And based on that fear, I didn't have any principles to live by, which I didn't know. I didn't know that. Why I wanted to get sober was I was miserable. I don't remember having a lot of fun. I didn't drink socially. I drank to get high, and when I couldn't drink anymore, I was introduced to cocaine, and that aided me in being able to stay up later and drink longer and drive under the influence. So that went on for several years, and I got 2 DUIs, and at first I kind of laughed at the first one, and the second one a month later, I told the sheriff that he really needed to get a job and call me a cab and quit bothering me. And so he put the cuffs on me, and they took me to jail again, and God, it was the first indication that there was something wrong with the way I thought about things. I had a child, I was a single mother, and that really put that in jeopardy as far as, my ex-husband was a captain of the fire department. He could have easily slipped in and said, well, she's an unfit mother, which was always his, he didn't like paying child support, so he was always nipping at my heels for that. And I took that risk, I gambled that. At this time, I was bartending. I was a bartender, and after my shift, I always had a few drinks, and of course it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and that made me a prime target. So I let them know that that's what was really going on, and not that I didn't have a problem. The courts disagreed with me, and they sentenced me to hundreds of hours of community service. I had to do time in jail, but outpatient jail. Heavy fines and a lot of restrictions. They found other miscellaneous contraband in my purse. And so I was in either one drug class court or something for over a year, paying my debt to society. While I was there, I started to get some more indication there was something wrong with the way I thought, because I showed up for my one-on-one high. This was after 2 DUIs, and I went to my meeting with the drug counselor high. Don't know why she didn't turn me in. But the next day, again, scratching my head thinking, there's something wrong with the way I think. I could have really, lost a lot of stuff. I was not the type of alcoholic that lost, I always had a place to live, I always had a car, and a little safety net in the bank. I was probably a control freak, but I was put on my own so young that I always was responsible. Excuse me, to talk through the jitters. And So, you know, you couldn't say, well, she's not managing her life. My life was manageable. It was my innards that weren't manageable. All my vacations were through alcohol and cocaine. I really could never have a healthy relationship, and I couldn't figure that out. I kept reinventing my childhood and my relationship with my parents and my brothers and blah, 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 and I was sick of it. I started to notice that my parenting skills weren't what they could be, and my daughter needed something from me that I didn't have. So it all started to come together, and I was in my DUI school, and I started meeting people. Well, I thought these people were nice people, and they were sober, because they weren't in the bar business, and every one of my friends were dealers or addicts or drinkers and blah, 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 so on. You know the scenario there. And I decided to I said to my teacher, you know, I want to see what, I want to give up drinking and alcohol and drugs. And I was able to do 15, 16 days at a time. But by that 16th day, I was looking at my watch, driving to work, snapping for my dealer, and going for a 2-day run. Again, I thought, well, you're not really free of this because you still are being controlled by your need to get outside of your body. And I would do those 16, 17 days with clenched teeth. So what I really was able to do was abstain longer than most. And that worked for a while until when I would go back to that one time I allowed myself to drink, it was so hard and heavy, and it was costing quite a bit of money, and coming back from it wasn't as easy. The hangovers were getting worse, and I was feeling sicker and sicker, and that demoralization was creeping up and really biting me in the ass. So I decided I was going to give sobriety a try. All odds were against me. I was a bartender. I checked myself into 32 Grove, and I escaped in a week. And I went home, and my family was there to meet me, and they cleaned me out of all my paraphernalia, and I had some weed growing in the yard. And my dad says, I know you have some Librax. I go, you're not getting that. I said, not yet. And they were kind of looking at me because they didn't see any damages or effect of my drinking. I lived in a nice place. I had 2 cars. That wasn't happening. It didn't matter to them that I was stealing for my drugs. They didn't care, I didn't ask them for anything. And so I got home and I looked around and I went back to work, and I didn't drink or use. And I remember the first time, now all of a sudden they wanted to give me free drugs because I was quitting. And I remember somebody giving me a bindle, and I froze, and I didn't want to pass up a good deal. So I said, well, hey, can my friend have it? Because it was free after all. So I was able to make it 2.5 years with no drugs, no alcohol. And I decided then it would be okay for me to smoke some weed because I didn't really get into this to quit smoking weed anyway. And I had been going to meetings at the Milano Club day in and day out, but I didn't get it. I didn't get what it meant yet. I didn't realize that it was a disease of the heart and your brain and a lot of other different things. So I smoked my marijuana. I would go to an AA dance, and then I'd leave for a minute, and I'd smoke a joint. And this one particular night, they weren't done setting up, and I was driving down to Fairfax, and I was in a beat-up car that was wiggling on the road, and the red lights went on. I don't know how, to me it was a God thing, but I lied my way out of it. Told him I picked up a hitchhiker and kicked him out of my car because he lit up a joint. And this cop wanted to choke me. He was fuming. But the good part was I wasn't able to get it lit, so I had slammed it in the ashtray, and he couldn't arrest me. So he said to me, if you get out of town tonight, we're not going to arrest you. If we see you again, you're going to jail. And still, I was on probation. And again, I thought, God, there's something wrong with the way I think. So I went back to the Milano Club, And my sponsor was there, and she says to me, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" And I said, "No." Nope. And I had the best sponsor in the world. She's going to kill me. I didn't tell her I was speaking tonight. So a few months went by, and I said, "This is insane." And my daughter had said to me, "I don't like you when you smoke that stuff." So September will be 19 years that I gave up everything. And what happened after that slip was a deeper sense of what was going on in this program. I did come clean with my sponsor. She showed me some outside programs to go along with my AA. And my real recovery began. And one of the things I know is that you can blame whoever you want, whatever, but, you know, my parents didn't have it in them to raise 3 kids. They did the best they could. They put me through Catholic school. I was dressed and fed. And that's what they did back then. You know, the 50s and the 60s. I think back, I go, they were still partying, raising 3 kids. And it was a way of life back then. They were in the restaurant business, and, you know, they did the best they could, which wasn't good enough because there's a lot of different neglect, and I was probably emotionally neglected more than anything. And I was raised with the beliefs of a 3-year-old that never were, you know, nobody ever said that's not the right way to think or whatever. So it was more like I went through life with no skills, no principles. You can go to Catholic school for 100 years and not walk out of there with principles. You can be afraid. The God that I learned about was a very fearful, mean, punishing God. So the program taught me to undo that. And because of that, I'm here tonight. I prayed all day, please don't let my voice jitter, but here we go. Doesn't happen, you still have to show up. You have to show up, and you don't have to know why. You just have to do it. And I know that every time I push through these challenges, some good comes out of it. My favorite prayer is the promises. I may have almost 19 years, but there's always room for growth. I just know that. You never stop growing, and it does get better all the time. But in recovery, I've had a lot of things. I've lost parents. I've lost friends. My brother became paralyzed, but he's also sober. My daughter's sober. Her husband's sober. I like to say my grandson's sober. He's got almost 3 years. But the difference in seeing her and how she gets to interact with her child, and the difference for having sober parents is another blessing of this program. It's part of the promises, because it unfolded. Part of why I got sober was to give a better life for my daughter, and that happened, that manifested. And getting back to, I did bartend a couple of years sober, which was amazing in itself. What I know about this program is it's change. It's about change. And I was there one day sober, watching everybody high, not missing it, looking at them and going, is this my life? Because I was still in that world, and I was sober, and I was bored to tears. And I had a visual of me being an old nonny washing glasses in a smock, and I went, what am I doing? And I had to figure out a way. And I prayed, I said, God, do for me what I can't do for myself. And I went into work, and the owner, who was already having a hard time with me because I was no longer using the product that he was peddling, and I wouldn't sleep with him, so I was kind of getting useless. So he said to me, listen, we need to change your shifts around, and we need to, and all this stuff. And I looked at him, and I said, why don't you give me 2 weeks, or to September 1st, and I'll leave. So during that month, another way God provided for me, everybody took a vacation. I was able to stash $1,000 in the bank without stealing. I did manage to clean that up before I left bartending. And I got a job. I got a job in a medical billing office. And I had to compensate that income because it didn't pay for anything, but the entire time God took care of me. I was able to work part-time on the weekends, although it added up to 7 days a week, but I made it through. And I was able to then go from that job to another better paying job in the medical field, and yet a better paying job. And to now, 19 years later, I'm a CFO for a small business. I took a lot of college courses. I don't have degrees after my name, but the experience spoke for itself. And my life goes on. And I just know that, along the way, when I was willing to trust people and open up again, that was not something I could ever do real well. I met a lot of wonderful women who, for instance, the women that I showed up at the counseling high did not turn me in. When I did go back to school, I was straight out of a bar, and my language was something to be desired. And it was kind of like a wild dog. And the women took me under their wing, and they were able to look past that. And a lot of things like that started to happen for me that unfolded because I was willing to look at myself. I mean, I wanted action. I went into therapy and I said, look, this has got to change. And I could see their eyes get big. I go, there's something about the way that I talk to people that scares them. And every time I took that step, I got back really good feedback, and I started to grow, and I started to change, and I started to trust. When I started to trust in God, and I do believe in God, higher power, I was able to go through things that were so uncomfortable. And believe it or not, one of the, even more uncomfortable than being up here public speaking was to be able to talk to somebody on a level. I was the type of person that if I felt like you did me wrong, I would have revenge for you, and you would never see it coming. I wasn't able to come up to you and say, that hurt my feelings when you did that. I would appreciate that if you didn't do that. That was not what I learned. So I started to practice that. And the results I got were, I acted human. They responded to me human. Wow. And when I let go of the results of things, like for instance, I wouldn't want to ask you for something because if you said no, then I couldn't have it. So I'd rather sneakily manipulate it out of you so I could get what I want. And that stopped working in sobriety. When you start to follow principles, you can't behave like that, or I could not behave in those ways and still stay sober unless I was responding to the world instead of reacting with the tools that I learned as that wild doggy. And I got a better response from people when I started to do that, and they started to trust me. And that trust gave me self-esteem. And it all tied in because when I had good self-esteem, I couldn't behave like that. I couldn't self-defecate. I couldn't, do the things that I did when I was intoxicated so that I could behave a certain way and not really feel it. It's not even not take responsibility. I didn't have to feel it. There's a lot of things you can't do sober when you're having a principled spiritual life that you can do under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And that is a couple of those are lie, cheat, and steal. When you're working a program and you have principles in your life, it's not so easy to do that kind of behavior. You can try it, but I bet you're going to go drink and use again. And one of the best things about that is I don't have fear in my life anymore. I'm not fearful of dying. I'm not fearful of losing all my worldly goods. I say, well, if God wants that to happen for me, there must be a lesson. And every time I get a lesson, and it may be a lesson in change and I don't like it, the outcome has always been wonderful. So I often, most of the time, hopefully sooner than hanging on to it, do throw my will and my life into the care of God, because that's been the best way. When I was running it, it sucked. When I try to run it now, it sucks. I never win when I'm trying to control the outcome of a situation. One of the big fears for everybody, I think, is financial insecurity. And I look and I'm alone, and I think, if I do live to 82, who's going to take care of me? Where am I going to live? You know, how am I going to do that? I better not buy those socks because, you know, I better save that money for my old age. And that's not the case today. I somehow know whatever the outcome is going to be okay. I'm going to live through it or not. That's just the way it is. It's not to say that I walk around with this shield and I'm never afraid anymore. I'm afraid. But I try not to run from fear, and I try not to let it run my life and do the kinds of things that would make me dishonorable to myself because I'm fearful about certain things. For instance, I'm not going to steal those sunglasses because I want them, but I don't want to pay for them. I don't need them. That's the bottom line. I always get what I need in this program. It isn't what I want, thank God. A lot of the things that I wanted in the past were very hurtful to me. And I just sit back. Sometimes I say, you know, you really need to help me out here, God, because I'm tired of sitting in this one situation. And I find that I'm hanging on to something. I'm hanging on. I have hooks into that situation. I find whenever I have to detach from that situation, whatever it is, that's keeping me hooked into that dysfunctional thing. I can always look around and say, oh, it's my, I don't want to say fault, it's my decision that I'm staying here. Why? Because I'm afraid of change, or I don't want to do the work. Again, I'll say this program's not for sissies. It takes work. And you might be comparing yourself, oh, they can still drink. You can't be weak and be in this program and succumb to the pressures of recovery. It's, the benefits are so worthwhile, but when you're trudging through the mud, it doesn't always feel that way. That's why I find the support of the groups and the meetings and being with sober people, they always understand where you're coming from. You know, you don't have difficulty in a room full of other alcoholics talking about your feelings or your issues. There's always somebody you can relate to. It's when you try to pretend that you're normal and be in the normal world. I don't know what that is. I don't think it's normal to be in bars 5 nights a week. I worry about, quote, normies who don't have the principles to live by. You tell me somebody's normal and I sit back and wait and go, we'll see. I think people are at different levels of dysfunction. And I think we all grow from, you know, a sprout. Some of us take longer, but we all start out dysfunctional. And it is a blessing to have found, because I didn't start drinking till later, I had to get used to alcohol. I tried alcohol when I was young, and I didn't like it, so I turned to pills and pot. And then that got to be not strong enough. And I continued to push forward till I could actually do the alcohol thing. And because I was a bartender, that made it really nice and easy. But I found when I gave up drugs and alcohol that the problem really is how I thought about things and how I dealt with life. And life on life's terms was not acceptable. I always tried to control where I was at. Anytime I wasn't on a chemical, I took a chemical. However I was feeling was not okay. I only had 2 emotions. That was anger, rage, and anxiety. And that's all that was really acceptable in my family was, you know, if you were running around happy, what's wrong with you? Shut up, be still. That was reinforced at Catholic school. You never got to think what you feel what you felt, say what you meant. So I spent many years changing how I felt. And when it became impossible to do it any longer without drugs and alcohol, that was easier. You're not feeling right, you better take drugs and alcohol. It was just a way. And to get comfortable with life on life's terms is a process. Sometimes I'm really, really comfortable, and other times I'm not. And I have to get in acceptance about that. I was never in acceptance about anything. That just wasn't my nature. And now I get in acceptance fast because I don't get a stomach ache. If I just go, this is the way it is, you want to fight it, how much energy are you going to spend doing this? You know, how deep are you going to sink your claws into this, and what is your outcome? And so I pray a lot. Please let me not get in my own way, and let me unhook from whatever this, you know, thing I'm stuck in that's causing me pain. Being in the business world, you know, that happens a lot. I work with a lot of people, and you see, I've worked through a lot of my greed issues and selfishness and, you know, screw them before they screw you. How do you do that without taking it laying down? That was another issue. How do I take care of myself in a healthy, positive, spiritual way? Well, that was all about learning conversation, and fuck you, fucker is not a real good skill. Are you going to bleep that? And that's what, you know, that's what I learned. I was born in a project, so it was all about reinventing who I am. And I think, was it reinventing or getting back to the spiritual, loving person God intended me to be? It's a constant challenge, and I get bored easily. I don't like to stay in one place, you know. I like to continue. My mind needs to be fed. I like to do things, and I like to be involved in the world. And to do that, I have to stay spiritually fit. I have to stay spiritually centered. How do I do that? It comes at me in all different ways. Meeting Kelly, speaking for her, meeting somebody, showing up here, pushing through the nervousness, taking the challenge, and going for it. I don't know today what's going to come out of this. But I do know that there'll be some movement. There'll be some change. There'll be some growth. And every time that happens, I get more and more centered with myself, and I feel more centered with God, and more in touch with other human beings. I don't know about you, but I can isolate in a room full of people with no problem. So I want to thank everybody for letting me be here. I think I'm pretty much out of anything else to say. And I'm grateful that you're all here, and thank you for letting me share tonight.